Now, generally on this channel, I like to have fun and talk about silly shows and movies. Today, however, I want to talk about an animated movie that is one of the most depressing things I've ever seen. Before we get to it though, I do want to give a bit of warning that the movie that we're talking about, The Plague Dogs, deals with some upsetting material. If you're the type that doesn't like to hear about animal abuse or the horrors of animal testing, then you should probably click off the video now. I'll do my best to walk around the subject matter, but I felt I should give a warning first. I will be discussing the movie in full, so there will be spoilers, but honestly, I don't really expect people to actively search out and watch this movie. With that out of the way, let's dive in. The Plague Dogs is a 1982 animated film directed by Martin Rosen, the man who directed the similarly themed 1978 animated film Watership Down. Both The Plague Dogs and Watership Down were based off their respective novels, both of which were written by author Richard Adams. Interestingly, the idea for Watership Down came from a story Adams told his two daughters during a car trip. They liked the story so much that they insisted he publish it. What a weird car trip that must have been. Here's a nice little story about bunnies where they tear each other's throats out. The Plague Dogs would also be worked on by the same animators that animated Watership Down, including a new American team that consisted of some up-and-coming names like Brad Bird, who would eventually go on to direct The Iron Giant and The Incredibles, and legendary artists like Retta Scott, who was the very first woman to receive an on-screen credit by Disney as an animator, and the artist responsible for creating the scenes in Bambi where Bambi's mother is chased by the hunting dogs. Apparently, when her male counterparts saw how ferocious the dogs looked, they were shocked. They didn't think a woman would have the technical skills or intensity to animate something with such ferocity. But she did, and she brought that ferocity to the Plague Dogs. Now, this story follows two dogs, Ralph, voiced by Christopher Benjamin, and Snitter, voiced by John Hurt, as they escape an animal testing facility in search of a new master. While on the run, they're being tracked by researchers, hunters, and the military because they may or may not have come in contact with the bubonic plague. The animal testing facility had been experimenting on various animals with various tests, and it's feared the dogs could have it and could spread it unless found. This movie does not hold back. Literally the first few minutes as the credits appear on the screen, all you hear is the splashing of water, the muffled whimpers of a dog, and this low rumbling ambient sound. Not music, just this unsettling noise. It only gets worse when we see one of the main characters, Ralph, a black lab who is being forced to swim until he just cannot take it any longer. The test is to see just how long the animal will fight for survival if it believes there's hope. And even worse, this was an actual test that was conducted using rats. Ralph is an older dog and has never known anything outside of the testing facility. The animals here are just treated like objects, like things that don't think or feel. Ralph is resuscitated but struggles more and more each and every test, either coincidentally or on purpose, but Ralph's cage number is 732, which is one number away from 731, the number of the Japanese unit from World War II that performed horrific tests on captive prisoners and even fellow countrymen. There are tons of different tests being conducted at the facility, and Ralph's friend Snitter, a fox terrier, has had some poking and prodding done to his brain, which over the course of the film will cause him great pain or to experience hallucinations. Ralph can no longer stand the experimentations and hates the whitecoats, as he calls them, who subject him to the horrific torture. After discovering Ralph's cage is unlocked, Snitter convinces Ralph to escape, though Ralph is hesitant because even though he hates it here, it's all he knows. Despite the pain and suffering, there's a safeness to this cage. I wouldn't call The Plague Dogs a horror film, but it has some very creepy imagery. Like here when Ralph and Snitter enter this room with all the gloves hanging off the tables. It's really unsettling. The dogs get themselves inside an incinerator because Snitter can smell fresh air coming from within. Unlike Ralph, Snitter knows there are good people. He once had a master, but his master was hit and killed by an oncoming vehicle when trying to save Snitter. After that, he found himself here as he was blamed for what happened to the man that was really only trying to save his best friend. The two animals manage to find an exit out of the incinerator, escaping just before the whitecoats turn it on. For the first time in his life, Ralph actually gets to look up at the night sky and not just the lights of an operating table. Ralph is still very bitter towards the whitecoats, and for good reason. His entire life, all they did was torture him. But Snitter knows there are masters out there, like his previous one, that will treat them much better. It's hard to argue with Ralph, the way he sees people, because all he's ever experienced by their hands is pain. The The two dogs are now on a journey to find a new master, and this could easily be the story of a Disney movie. But the brightness, the fun journey, all the things that would make this an everyday animated movie are missing. Everything is gray and brown. Even the colors feel muted to give the movie a drab and darker feeling. The dogs find a small town and Snitter takes Ralph into the nearby shop because he knows there's food inside, and if they're nice, the man may give them some. However, once they see the butcher in his white apron holding the knife, they think it's one of the white coats come to take them back. Snitter even has a seizure on the side of the road, and when a man stops to take him to the vet, Ralph snarls at the man because to him all humans are white coats. Speaking of the humans, you don't really see their faces too often. Most of the time we're seeing just below their head, putting us in the perspective of the dogs and the world they see. Ralph and Snitter try to gain a master by herding some sheep, but instead draw the ire of some sheepdogs. Snitter blames himself for the situation they're in. They don't have food, no master, and the world is nothing like what he remembers. In Snitter's head, the world is the town where he lived with his master. To him, all these fields and hills were put there by the whitecoats. The way the dogs speak or how they see things isn't exactly the same way a human would see things. It's hard to explain what I mean, but there's a childlike innocence to how they see this brand new world around them. With the desperation of hunger setting in, Ralph attacks and kills one of the sheep they tried herding earlier. And though we don't see the act itself, the aftermath is pretty bloody. The following day, the farmer discovers his half-eaten sheep, so now he's on alert for the two dogs. Snitter and Ralph bring some of the sheep back to a nearby cave, but something inside has been following them. They meet a very shady fox named the Todd. Todd had been following them for a couple days and figures the three of them should stick together for survival. He can show them how to survive out there if they share some of what they kill. Todd is a hard character to pinpoint because you don't know exactly if he can be trusted. He does some shady things when Ralph and Snitter aren't looking, but also has their backs in the most dire of situations. The three animals work together killing sheep and ducks from the local farm, but the farmer and other hunters team up to take care of the nuisance. Todd warns the others that they need to leave as the farmers and their dogs are inching closer and closer. The farmers call the testing facility and inform the whitecoats that some of their dogs may be in the area. And every time we're brought back to this hellhole, we always get the most depressing scenes of monkeys and rabbits that are currently being experimented on, just to remind everyone what Ralph and Snitter could be dealing with. One night, Snitter just sort of leaves the other two. Something, and most likely his brain, sets him to wander off. He's spotted by one of the hunters. However, when the hunter sees the wound on Snitter's head, he calls him over and asks who could have done such a thing to him. We then get one of the most disturbing scenes in the movie.
Well, fella, come on, up we go.
I don't know why this needed to be in the movie, but it's quite shocking. And seeing how friendly the man was being, there's a good chance he may have taken Snitter and Ralph in. So this may have ruined their one last chance of having an actual master. Strangely, the dogs are also blamed for the death of the man, as if it was done maliciously. Ralph spends the next 2 days tracking Snitter down, and when he finds him, he's curled up in some rundown building. It's really heartbreaking because Snitter believes it's his fault this man died, just like it's his fault his master died while trying to save him. He doesn't understand that one thing was an accident and the other was because his master loved him so much. Later on, while digging through some trash, Ralph is scared away, but Snitter is locked away in a shed because the homeowner feels sorry for the small injured dog. Ralph and Todd return to free Snitter, and Ralph ends up biting a police officer during the escape. While the dogs wander around with Todd, trying to avoid the humans, you hear narration from the whitecoats as they talk about the experiments they were putting the dogs through, and all they seem to care about is the work that has been flushed down the drain. These animals are nothing more than a number to them. The dogs and Todd continue to live off the land, but after Todd finds some eggs and eats all of them without telling Ralph, well, that's the end of their friendship. Throughout the movie, Todd seemed to come and go when the relationship served him, and Ralph at this point has had all he could take. The two dogs are caught stealing a chicken, but the word is out these two are from the animal testing facility and may be contaminated, so they're allowed to leave. Although narration from the whitecoats suggests that they aren't infected at all. But since the media spread the word that they are, there really is no putting that genie back in the bottle. As more time passes, it begins to snow. The media is spreading the wild tales of the dogs attacking people, and they have a hunter following their tracks. The hunter spots the two dogs, but he's completely unaware that he's being followed by Todd. Just as he's about to shoot, he's startled by Todd and sent careening down the hilltop side where he dies. Ralph and Snitter have been starving, unable to find food because of the harsh weather. You can even see the ribs sticking out of Snitter's side. So in their desperation, they do the only thing they can. Though it makes things worse for them because when a rescue team is searching for the man, all they find is his half-eaten remains. This single shot was cut from most edits of the film and wouldn't be included in a US release until 2019, almost 40 years after the movie came out. The issue of the dogs has blown into a political nightmare. Despite the Whitecoats' adamance that the dogs do not have the plague, the fact the media has reported they do has now forced the military to get involved. All this because 2 dogs refuse to be experimented on. The dogs are completely surrounded, but with the help of Todd, try and evade the military. Todd even uses himself as bait to try and distract the approaching military dogs, though it doesn't end well for Todd, who eventually is bitten and then cornered by the military dogs. Todd was hard to gauge throughout the entire movie, always doing rather shady things, coming and going, but in the end he really showed where his loyalty lied and that he really did have the backs of Snitter and Ralph. Before I go further, I just want to say that we are in the end game. If you do not want to know what happens at the end, then stop here now. Ralph and Snitter board a train that is closed to the public for winter. It still runs, however, and brings Snitter and Ralph to the sea. They are found once again by the military and run for their lives. They make it to the beach, but the military begin to close in. Snitter then points out that he can see an island in the sea, and that's where they need to go. Ralph is absolutely terrified of the water. Anytime he's near it, he just freezes up. After the experiments he's had to endure, it's hard for him to even be near it, but there's no way he's going back to the Whitecoats. So he gets in the water and follows Snitter. The 2 dogs swim as a thick fog rolls in. Snitter begins to give up as he's just too tired, but Ralph encourages him to continue as even he can see the island now. The 2 dogs push on through the fog, and that's the last we see them. As the credits roll, you do see an island, but here's the thing. This island is more than likely metaphorical. In the original book, Snitter's master isn't dead, and he finds the dogs, and they live, well, happily ever after. This was not the original intended ending, however, and author Richard Adams was told by his editor to change the ending to a happier one. However, when he handed his manuscript to director Martin Rosen, it was his original version before it was tinkered with. It's heavily implied here that the dogs, in fact, did drown. And this island is heaven or the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. Though it's left ambiguous enough that if you want to think the dogs did make it to an island, you can believe that too. The Plague Dogs is an experience. It's not a movie I can recommend, and not because it's not good, because it is. It's just heartbreaking. I've seen it a few times now, and that ending always kills me. As a dog lover, or just animal lover in general, it's hard to see these animals go through what they're experiencing, even if they're just animated. And the animation is very well done throughout. They went out of their way to make the dogs look and act like real dogs. Generally, when you have animated animals, they tend to take on human characteristics, but here they really do look and feel like real dogs, which I think only compounds just how truly awful the entire thing is. One interesting thing I learned is the animation was drawn frame by frame and without the use of rotoscoping. Rotoscoping, for those that don't know, is basically taking live footage and drawing over it frame by frame to give the animation a very lifelike quality. This technique was used for the original Lord of the Rings animated movies, which is why everything looks so fluid. But the Plague Dogs was done without any rotoscoping, yet the animators were really able to capture the movements of the dogs really well. The music is also really well done, but generally creepy throughout. There are some brief moments where it's a little jazzier and more upbeat. But that's quickly done away with once the reality of the situation sets in. The movie was kind of a flop, and by kind of, I mean a huge flop. When it came out, no one really saw it. I don't know if people knew what the movie was about, but they avoided it like the plague. During the film's UK premiere, director Martin Rosen was confronted by an elderly woman who asked him how he could do that to those dogs, before hitting him with her umbrella. At the US premiere, he would wait for people exiting the theater and ask them what they thought of the movie, with one moviegoer telling him, "You don't want to see this, it's too depressing." With no one watching the movie, it was quickly pulled from theaters, and that was basically that. Because of its very short theatrical run, most of the American animators never even got to see the finished product. It's only been in the last decade or so that the movie has seen something of a cult resurgence, with boutique physical media label Shout Factory releasing it in 2019. But with all that said, is The Plague Dogs the most depressing animated film ever made? Well, that's hard to say. I've seen some pretty sad ones. At the very least, I don't think there are any animated films that are more depressing, but there are certainly some that are just as depressing. Where the Wind Blows and Barefoot Gen immediately spring to mind. But how do you feel about The Plague Dogs? Let me know down in the comments. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you have a great week. Maybe you should watch something a little bit more cheerful, and take care.